In the story of the 20th century, there are moments that forever divide time into a before and an after. The First World War, the invention of the airplane. And then there was a flash of light in a desolate desert, brighter than 1,000 suns a moment, when humanity unlocked the terrifying power of the stars and held it in its own mortal hands. That moment was Trinity. The year was 1945. And the man at the center of it all, the man whose genius had conjured this terrible new fire, was J. Robert Oppenheimer. He was the father of the atomic bomb. A man of breathtaking brilliance, a theoretical physicist who could quote ancient Sanskrit as easily as he could explain quantum mechanics. He was a flawed, fragile, and profoundly complex figure, a wealthy New York intellectual who loved the rugged wilderness of New Mexico, a charismatic leader who inspired the absolute devotion of the world's greatest scientific minds, and a man haunted by his own creation. As he witnessed that first atomic explosion, a line from the Bhagavad Gita famously entered his mind. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." It was a moment of terrible world-changing triumph, and it would cast a long, dark, and radioactive shadow over the rest of his life. But while Oppenheimer was wrestling with the fate of humanity, his own 2 children were living a secret life inside the strange, militarized, barbed-wire world of Los Alamos. A city that didn't exist on any map. A city built for a single terrible purpose. Their lives would be defined by their father's genius, his subsequent brutal public disgrace during the McCarthy era, and a legacy of profound, heartbreaking, and almost invisible tragedy. What really happened to the children of J. Robert Oppenheimer? In this video, we will tell the complete, deeply private, and ultimately tragic stories of Peter and Toni, the 2 children of the brilliant and controversial J. Robert Oppenheimer. Born into the epicenter of the atomic age, their childhood was a surreal experiment in secrecy and pressure. Their adulthood was then shaped by the immense weight of their father's world-changing achievement and his subsequent cruel public humiliation. We will explore the life of Peter Oppenheimer, the firstborn son who struggled his entire life to find his own path in the colossal shadow of his father's genius, ultimately choosing a life of quiet manual labor in a profound and total rejection of his father's intellectual world. And we will delve into the heartbreaking story of Katherine Toni Oppenheimer, the gifted and sensitive daughter born in the secret city of Los Alamos. A brilliant young woman whose life and career were tragically derailed by the lingering political vengeance of her father's powerful enemies, leading to a profound and sorrowful end. To bring you this incredible historical saga, we have gone deep into the archives of the Manhattan Project, read the declassified and devastating transcripts of Oppenheimer's 1954 security hearing, and synthesized the information from authoritative Pulitzer Prize-winning biographies like Kai Bird and Martin J. Sherwin's American Prometheus. This is the story of the human fallout of the atomic age, a cautionary tale about the immense personal cost of a world-changing and world-threatening legacy. Number 2. Peter Oppenheimer, the son in the shadow. He was the firstborn, the son of a certified genius, a man who led the world's greatest scientific minds in a race to end a world war. The expectations, spoken or unspoken, were monumental. But for Peter Oppenheimer, the weight of his father's name and the chaotic, emotionally barren landscape of his family life would be a constant, crushing burden he would spend his entire life trying to escape. Born in May of 1941, Peter Oppenheimer's life began just as his father was being drawn into the most secret and consequential project in human history. His earliest years were spent in the strange, surreal, and intensely isolated environment of Los Alamos, New Mexico. This was a secret city built from scratch in the high desert, fenced in with barbed wire and patrolled by military police. His birth certificate listed his place of birth simply as P.O. Box 1663. His neighbors were Nobel laureates like Enrico Fermi and Richard Feynman. The air crackled with intellectual energy and the immense pressure of the race to build the atomic bomb before the Nazis. But for a young boy, it was a deeply unsettling environment. His relationship with his parents was difficult from the very start. J. Robert Oppenheimer, consumed by his monumental task, was an intellectually intimidating and often emotionally distant father. His mother, Katherine "Kitty" Oppenheimer, was a brilliant but deeply troubled woman. A trained biologist, she struggled immensely with alcoholism, deep bouts of depression, and the constraints of being a wife and mother in a world that valued her husband above all else. Accounts from Los Alamos and from the children themselves later in life describe her parenting as often cold, impatient, and neglectful. Peter was not the scientific prodigy his father may have hoped for. He was a quiet, sensitive, and often anxious boy who struggled in the high-pressure academic environments he was constantly placed in. After the war, the family moved to Princeton, New Jersey, where his father became the celebrated director of the Institute for Advanced Study, the intellectual home of Albert Einstein. But the peace and prestige of this new life were short-lived. The defining trauma of Peter's youth came in 1954. At the height of the McCarthy-era Red Scare, his father was subjected to a brutal, month-long security hearing, designed to destroy his reputation and his influence. J. Robert Oppenheimer, the national hero of the Manhattan Project, was publicly cross-examined. His loyalty, questioned his pre-war communist associations, and his complicated personal life picked apart with vicious precision. In the end, his security clearance was revoked. He was humiliated, a national hero publicly cast out, and branded as a potential traitor. Imagine being a 13-year-old boy coming home from school to find your father broken. Reading the scandalous headlines, seeing your father publicly vilified by the very government he had served so faithfully. The event was a devastating blow to the entire family, and it solidified Peter's deep and abiding distrust of the outside world and all its institutions. He continued to struggle in his father's intellectual footsteps. He was sent to prestigious boarding schools but never thrived. He spent some time at college but never graduated. He seemed lost, unable to find a path for himself in the colossal, suffocating shadow of his father's name. After his father's death from throat cancer in 1967, Peter made a definitive, life-altering choice. He retreated. He moved permanently to his father's beloved rustic ranch in the mountains of New Mexico, a property named Perro Caliente. And there in the wilderness, his father had so loved the son of the great theoretical physicist, built a new life, a life of profound simplicity and manual labor. He became a carpenter, a skilled craftsman. He ran the ranch. He married, had a family of his own, and raised his children far from the world of academia, politics, and public scrutiny. It was a deliberate and total rejection of his father's world. For his entire adult life, Peter Oppenheimer has maintained an almost absolute and, at times, aggressive silence. He has consistently refused to speak to historians, biographers, or journalists about his father. When the recent Christopher Nolan film Oppenheimer was in production, he was one of the few living people connected to the story who refused to participate. His silence is his statement. His privacy is his victory. His story is one of a quiet, lifelong retreat, a determined search for peace and anonymity after a childhood spent at the terrifying radioactive epicenter of history. Peter's response to his father's legacy was to build a wall between himself and the world. His younger sister, however, was a brilliant and outgoing young woman who tried to engage with that world, only to have it cruelly and tragically turned against her in a final devastating act of political vengeance. Number 1. Katherine Toni Oppenheimer. The child of the atomic age, she was born in the secret city of Los Alamos, literally a child of the atomic age. Bright, gifted, and full of a promise that her brothers seemed to lack, she was the daughter who might have carried the family's intellectual torch into a new generation. But her life was tragically derailed by the lingering poisonous echoes of her father's political persecution. This is the heartbreaking story of Katherine Toni Oppenheimer. Katherine Oppenheimer, known to everyone as Toni, was born on December 7, 1944, in the base hospital at Los Alamos. Her birth came at the most intense and critical phase of the Manhattan Project, as the scientists were racing to finalize the design of the bomb. She was in the truest sense a child of the bomb. Unlike her older brother Toni, was intellectually precocious, lively, and outgoing. She was a gifted linguist and showed immense promise from a young age. As she grew into a young woman, she hoped to follow a career in international relations, a world of diplomacy that stood in stark contrast to the world of destruction her father had presided over. She was particularly skilled as a translator. But the ghost of her father's political persecution, the stain of the 1954 security hearing, would come to haunt her in the most direct and devastating way imaginable. In the late 1960s, after her father's death, Toni applied for a position as a translator with the United Nations. It was a job for which she was eminently and perfectly qualified. However, to get the job she needed a security clearance from the U.S. government. In a final cruel and posthumous act of political vengeance against her late father, the FBI, under the long and vindictive memory of J. Edgar Hoover, intervened. They dredged up the old disproven allegations against J. Robert Oppenheimer. His pre-war communist sympathies, his so-called character defects. And they used this old poison to deny his daughter the security clearance she needed to pursue her dream. The official reason was tied to her father's past, but the message was clear: the sins of the father, even imagined, and politically motivated sins, would be visited upon the child. For Toni, this was a shattering, life-altering blow. Her chosen career path, the future she had worked so hard for, was destroyed. Not by any fault of her own, but by the lingering toxic political poison of the McCarthy era. According to family, friends, and biographers, the event broke her spirit. Her life began to unravel. Her first marriage ended in divorce. She struggled with periods of deep depression. Seeking a refuge, a place to escape, she moved to the beautiful island of St. John in the U.S. Virgin Islands, a place her parents had loved and where they had built a small, simple beach house. She worked as a charter boat operator and tried to build a new, quiet life for herself, far away from Washington and the ghosts of the past. But the profound sadness, the sense of a future stolen, never seemed to leave her. In January of 1977, just a month after her 32nd birthday, the story of Toni Oppenheimer came to a tragic and sorrowful end. In the small house her father had built, she took her own life. Her death was the final devastating piece of human fallout from the J. Robert Oppenheimer saga. A brilliant young woman, a child of immense promise, whose life was effectively destroyed by the same political forces that had sought to destroy her father. Her story is a heartbreaking and cautionary tale about the long, dark, and often invisible reach of political persecution and the last tragic explosion of the bomb that her father had created. Together, the lives of Peter and Toni Oppenheimer are a somber, deeply cautionary tale about the immense personal cost of world-changing events. One son who retreated into a lifetime of silence, and one daughter who was tragically silenced by the echoes of the past. They are the forgotten human story at the very heart of the atomic age, the children who lived and died in the shadow of the bomb. This theme of the children of a great and often tormented 20th century scientific mind is something we have explored before on this channel. In a previous video, we examined the incredible life and complex family of Albert Einstein, the only scientist whose name is more synonymous with genius than Oppenheimer's. We explored his world-changing theories, his escape from Nazi Germany, and the often difficult and tragic relationships he had with his own children. You can watch that definitive story by clicking the link right here. And just like the Oppenheimers, his children had their own hidden, often heartbreaking stories, living in the shadow of a man who belonged not to a family, but to the cosmos. We are currently developing a deep dive, Albert Einstein's Three Children, the Untold Story. To explore that incredible scientific and family saga, be sure to subscribe and have hit that notification bell. You will not want to miss it.